The snow crunched beneath our feet, each step sinking deeper into the untouched layers of white powder. The sun was sinking lower, inching away from us behind the thick, black silhouettes of towering pines. It was a bad idea. I knew it. Tom knew it. We just hadn't admitted it yet. "We must be lost," Tom muttered, his voice laced with growing worry. "I told you we should have gone the other way." His breath misted in the frigid air, barely visible in the fading light. The knot in my stomach tightened. We'd come out here for a simple day of winter fishing, but now, trapped in the middle of nowhere with the sky darkening fast, things were looking bleak. "Let's keep calm," I said, but my voice was thin. We just got turned around, that's all." But I didn't feel as confident as I tried to sound. We'd lost our footprints, buried under new snow, and now every direction looked the same, just miles of unbroken, snow-laden trees. The longer we walked, the deeper the forest seemed to pull us in. And then the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving us in a bluish-gray twilight. "We can't keep going like this at night," Tom said, trying to sound calm, but failing miserably. "We're better off staying put, maybe building a fire until morning." We had no choice, and despite the unease gnawing at me, I agreed. We scraped together what branches we could find, managed to build a small fire, and settled in beside it, pulling our jackets tighter against the bitter cold. Silence closed around us, thicker than any snowfall, and just as we started to feel its weight, a distant howl split the air. Tom's eyes widened. "Wolves!" I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Load the gun." I tried to keep my voice steady, but my pulse was hammering. Tom fumbled for the ammunition with shaking hands, loading the rifle in silence. Then we heard it again, closer, from the other side of us. Another howl, joined by several others in a haunting, bone-chilling chorus. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, searching, but all I saw were shifting shadows beyond the trees. I didn't see them, but I felt them. We were surrounded. "They're closing in," Tom whispered, clutching the rifle with white-knuckled fingers. "Then let's keep moving." Slowly, we started to make our way through the trees, my flashlight sweeping left to right as Tom held the gun ready. Every so often, I'd catch a glimmer of eyes in the darkness, a fleeting, hungry glow just beyond the edge of the light. The wolves moved with us, their howls echoing in eerie harmony, and the deeper we went, the more the trees seemed to close in, pushing us further from any way out. Suddenly, a big gray wolf emerged from the shadows, stalking slowly toward us. Tom raised the gun and fired a shot, and for a moment, the pack scattered into the darkness. "Run," I yelled, grabbing his arm, and we took off through the trees, slipping and stumbling over hidden roots and mounds of snow. Behind us, the howling resumed, growing louder and more frenzied as the wolves regrouped and chased after us. We ran, lungs burning, until we couldn't hear the howls anymore. Exhausted, we collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, our breaths turning into clouds in the freezing night. It was only then that I noticed the silence. There were no birds, no wind rustling through the branches, just an oppressive quiet that made my heartbeat sound deafening. "Where are we?" Tom whispered, looking around with wide eyes. That's when I realized where we were. Somehow we'd circled back to the lake. "We're just walking in circles." Tom's face was pale, his eyes fixed on something behind me. "Look," he said, pointing. I turned and saw it. A small, weathered cabin sitting a few yards away from the edge of the frozen lake. It was old, shrouded in decay, and the faded blue paint flaked off in pieces, revealing rotting wood underneath. But at that moment, it was shelter, and it was all we had. We pushed open the door, the rusty hinges creaking like a warning. Inside, the cabin was bare, except for a rough wooden bench and a small, cracked window that let in the dim moonlight. It didn't look like anyone had been here in years, and a strange smell lingered in the air, sour and metallic. "We'll stay here for the night," Tom said, too tired to argue about the eerie atmosphere. We unrolled our sleeping bags on the floor and settled in. But as I closed my eyes, I realized that sleep wasn't coming easily. My nerves were on edge, and every creak of the old cabin seemed amplified in the silence. Then, just as I started to drift off, I heard something. Distant at first, barely more than a whisper, but it sent a cold prickle up my spine. It was chanting, low, rhythmic, like voices muttering in some ancient, unknown language. I opened my eyes and looked over at Tom, who was staring at me with the same terrified expression. He heard it too. The chanting grew louder, and now I could make out more sounds. Bells tolling in slow, deliberate rhythm, accompanied by screams echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. It was like a nightmare, but I was wide awake. My heart was pounding as I sat up, glancing toward the window. Outside, a faint reddish glow illuminated the trees. It flickered and shifted as if something were burning, casting distorted shadows that danced along the snow. What is that?" Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, too scared to answer. The voices grew louder, closer, and with them came an eerie, guttural laughter. It was deep, resonant, echoing through the night like the laughter of something inhuman. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sounds outside were getting louder and louder. The soul-crushing screams were getting louder, and the low laughter was creeping us out. It was as if we were near the gates of hell. The hours dragged on, each one marked by fresh horrors. The laughter, the chants, and then, worse than anything, silence. Finally, the first light of dawn crept through the window, pale and thin. Outside, the forest was blanketed in an unnatural stillness, and the eerie red glow had vanished. When we left the hut, we decided to look at the place where the sounds were coming from. Dark crimson stains spattered the ground, and strange symbols had been scrawled in the ash, symbols that made my stomach twist just looking at them. We realized then what must have happened during the night, a ritual, some unholy ceremony that we had unwittingly stumbled upon. "Let's get out of here," Tom whispered, his voice shaking. Without another word, we turned and hurried away from the cabin, half running through the snow, not caring if we were going in the right direction. The forest seemed to release us from its grasp, and soon enough, we found ourselves on the main road, our car still parked where we'd left it. We didn't speak as we drove back to town, both of us still in shock. It wasn't until we got home that night, safe and warm in our beds, that the horror of what we'd seen began to truly sink in. We never returned to that lake again,